So, welcome back. I'm Brian Gray. I'm a senior fellow at PPIC, and I just want to do a brief introduction. So, at the far end, Lester Snow. Lester is now a consultant on water issues, and as the capstone of his career, he is also a member of the advisory council of PPIC's Water Policy Center. So, I want to thank him for that. Jeff Kightlinger is General Manager and Chief Executive Officer of the Metropolitan Water District, and Grant Davis, for the last 3 months, is the Director of the Department of Water Resources. And you do have everyone's bio. I just wanted to say a few things, though, about each of our panelists before we start. I want to start with Lester. Lester has... I always marvel when I'm on a panel with Lester because he has done just about everything one can do in the policy area of water in California. He began his work in Arizona as a groundwater specialist, focusing on the implementation of Arizona's Groundwater Management Act. He then became general manager of the San Diego County Water Authority. He was executive director of CalFed, Mid-Pacific director of the Bureau of Reclamation. Governor Schwarzenegger then appointed Lester to be director of the Department of Water Resources and then secretary of the Resources Agency. And following his retirement from government service, Lester served as executive director of the California Water Foundation until October of last year. And I just want to note that after all of that, we are still fighting over the Delta. So I would have held Lester
and Lester can't keep a job.
Yeah, that too. And I was going to say, in contrast, Jeff can keep a job. Jeff has been with the Metropolitan Water District for 22 years, first as general counsel and now as general manager. And as we all know, Jeff has a very difficult job, and that point was brought home to me again last evening. Jeff walked into a small gathering. He was wearing a Dodgers jersey, and someone leaned over to me and said, "Yet another reason to loathe the Metropolitan Water District." That was a Northern California crowd, mind you, but nonetheless. And then Grant decided for some reason to leave an idyllic job as general manager of the Sonoma County Water Agency, an agency that is extremely well run, not that it doesn't have its own issues, but very well managed, relatively isolated from state water politics, and he has now taken over probably the hot seat. And so the only thing I can say, Grant, is I will not ask you any questions about Oroville Dam during the course of this. So that'll be the one condolence.
I'm actually hoping you will.
Okay, well, all right, you could work that in. So I want to begin with just a brief overview and orientation, and then we'll get right to the panel's questions. So Governor Brown, again, as we all know, has proposed two 40-foot diameter tunnels that would divert water from the lower Sacramento River to the South Delta pumps, where the water would be available for the CVP and the State Water Project. The tunnels have a joint operational capacity of about 9,000 CFS total. And a complementary effort, California Eco Restore, is designed to restore about 30,000 acres of tidal marsh and floodplain habitat within and adjacent to the Delta. The current cost estimate on WaterFix is about $17 billion. The Delta, of course, is vital to California's economy as well as its ecology. The waters from the Delta serve more than 25 million people and about 3 million acres of farmland, the vast majority of which is south of the Delta in the San Francisco Bay Area, in the San Joaquin Valley, and in Southern California. The Delta is also home to a variety of anadromous and pelagic fish, all of which are under stress, and many of which, including most runs of salmon and steelhead, are listed for protection under the Endangered Species Act, State and Federal Endangered Species Act. And the Delta is subject to increasing threat because of the predicted effects of climate warming. WaterFix has passed all regulatory requirements so far, including consultation and biological opinions from the federal fisheries agencies, as well as an incidental take permit from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. The State Water Board is in the process of considering the Bureau's and DWR's petition to add North Delta intakes as lawful points of diversion for the two projects. It is also considering the project's petition for water quality certification under Section 401 of the Clean Water Act. And yet, WaterFix is foundering for two reasons. First, there remains significant political and legal opposition from most Northern California water agencies, in Delta users, and many, if not most, environmental and fishing organizations. Second, the project is expensive, and it is not clear whether there's a critical mass of beneficiary agencies that will be willing to sign on to purchase water and fund the project. And as you probably all read, the Trump administration confirmed yesterday that the United States will not provide any supplemental funding for the project. So before we get into kind of the heart of the matter, I thought I'd begin with Grant, but also include Jeff and Lester, and just start. Why does the administration believe that WaterFix and EcoRestore are in California's best interests, and how would WaterFix or something like it improve the management of water in the Delta?
Well, I'll get to that, but I'd first like to make an opening comment, which is how humbling and honored I am to be in the Governor Brown's designee to be the director of the Department of Water Resources. It's an overwhelming challenge, and one that I admit had to consider quite a bit. I was leaving a wonderful Sonoma County water agency that was completely off the Delta, and I enjoyed 10 years of work on the Russian River in that beautiful watershed, and was able to implement some water management strategies that I think could be models for other portions of the state in the West. And I look out at this audience and be on the stage with two people I admire and consider friends and colleagues. And I just want to say that, where would we be without a PPIC? It's absolutely unique in its role with regard to considering alternatives and the magnitude and the complexity of California water. I didn't even know you had a new water ferry, but we do have one, our own water ferry. In my neck of the woods, it was a ferry shrimp, but I'll take Jeff at his word, so you're not going to lose that moniker, sir. So we may need a ferry to get this done, but I'll tell you what, there is nothing more important at this time than for us to take the capacity of the state and recognize the challenge. And we're building off of essentially what Phil Eisenberg said to me moments ago, about 40 years worth of work to figure out a pathway forward that's more sustainable, that will secure our water supply, provide significant environmental benefits, and look at what we're dealing with. And the analogy I think I'm most comfortable with is that the Bay and the Delta are the heart of our water supply delivery system in the state. And you can't ignore the entire body. I mean, I subscribe that there are so many other aspects besides WaterFix that need attention, and I am working diligently with the team and our collaborators and partners and inside and outside DWR to look at the whole body, the whole state. But the fact of the matter is right now, the heart is ailing. It needs to be upgraded. We need to consider the age of the heart and the fact that no one less than Dr. Peter Moyle out of UC Davis, who's spent his entire career worrying about Delta smelt, has also recently opinioned that the status quo will no longer work. We are on the losing end of that battle. And that Bay Delta estuary is in need of attention. And so we're called upon right now to work off of those 40 years of efforts that many of these two and all of you in this room have been working toward to make a decision on how best to go forward. And it's just absolutely critical. And Dr. Moyle said, of all the things on the table being considered, that some version of the WaterFix is our pathway forward for the very health and survival of critical endangered species, including the smelt. And that's my moral compass. And that is someone I look to whose opinion I respect, who is above the fray, and is telling us that something must be done. And so the good news is, as you mentioned earlier, Brian, that the environmental hurdles, the permitting, the analysis, the CEQA documentation it's the largest CEQA document as far as I've ever seen. And that took time, and the complexity is understood. And we analyzed no less than 15 different versions completely for what type of water fix would enable us to move forward. So we don't have the option to sit this one out, gang. We don't. The status quo will take us into unreliability and ultimately a crisis and nobody wants to manage water in a crisis. So I think this is our last best chance, and the team's in place, the pathway's clear, and what we're looking at now is all of the state water contractors that these last couple of weeks, it's not well reported, but I want to make sure you understand. There's one that elected not to participate. We have a significant number of others that did, including the Metropolitan Water District, Zone 7, Kern, and many others. And I think it's at this time, I'm going to pass it to Mr. Kightlinger to go tell us why, Jeff, did you invest over $4 billion in the water fix?
It's fine with me. I'm happy to share the moderating duties too with Greg. Since he's so fond of PPIC, I think it's only appropriate that.
I think that's a fair
All
trade.
right, fair enough. Yeah, yeah.
Well, we actually haven't invested $4 billion yet, but we did vote to do that, and that's what our board voted to do a couple weeks ago. In the preferred alternative, and basically pay the Metropolitan's share of it, which would be about 26%. California has looked at doing some sort of Delta bypass since the 1930s, and we revisited it in the 1960s and again in the 1980s, and almost every decade since then we've looked at some way to deal with the conveyance issues through the Delta. And as long as we're going to have people on the coast, we're going to have that ability to move water from the Sierras to people on the coast, whether it be in Southern California, Central Coast, or Northern California. And we've been wrestling with it for decades. This is our, as Grant said, this is our best shot at the moment. We have gotten very, very, very far on an approach that does physically work. It is relatively affordable. It may be the failure of the commons that some people just can't make it work for their district, but it is something that is achievable and doable, and something we need to take advantage of and get this done while we have this opportunity.
And Lester, I'd like to get your thoughts. And if you could also you've been working on these issues for a long time, if you could just maybe highlight some of the water reliability as well as ecosystem water management benefits from the project.
Sure. I want to mention thing. I'll probably jump around here a little bit, which is I never do, so it's very unusual. But some of this has to do, we're going to have a reliable agricultural economy in California, and we're going to invest in order to be able to have that. And there's some people who look at agriculture as expendable, and those are people that are not very aware, and I'm sure we don't have any here today. But you run into that a lot, and California is a high producer, and you got to have a reliable water supply. And we've seen a steady decline in water supply reliability. And it's, whether people like to talk about climate change or not, we're seeing what climatologists have been telling us for 20 years, and that is an increase in extremes, worse droughts, higher runoff patterns. And so this is layered on an understanding that the Delta doesn't work. And I want to put a finer point on something that both Grant and Jeff mentioned. And I think we do a disservice when we all refer to this as the governor's twin tunnels or Brown's twin tunnels, as though he got in office and just thought, I'd like to build some big-ass tunnels. Which he might want to do. I don't know that. But for me, the story, modern story, starts with Governor Reagan. Bill Gianelli was ready to go out there and start building a Delta tunnel, and Reagan got in a fight with the federal government over how to pay for it. And the feds didn't want to pay. What? So it didn't move forward. And then Jerry Brown came in. I don't think that was at the top of his list, but by his second term, it became clear that Delta doesn't work. It doesn't function properly. And that led to the monumental 1982 electoral debacle, I guess I would say. Then you had Duke's Ditch. I mean, how many people even remember Duke's Ditch? But Governor Duke Majan came in and came up with a mini project in the Delta that basically died of boredom. I mean, no. I mean, it was just kind of like, what? And then you kind of keep going. Pete Wilson And the grand effort at CalFed, let's get everybody in a room and collaborate and work hard on this. And then you have changes in administration, federal administrations. So you kind of keep rolling forward. So if this isn't something that came up at the last minute, this comes from a broad, deep, long-term understanding that the Delta doesn't function. It's not functioning for the ecosystem. You have on the San Joaquin side a 97% mortality rate of out-migrating salmon. That's pretty high, I think. I'm not a biologist, but I'm guessing that's kind of high. So we're seeing, as I said, I'm going on much longer than Brian would have wanted me to, but we see a steady decline, and that's the part. That's the frog in the water, turning the heat up slowly. Ecosystem's not working no matter what we have been doing. Water supply is getting less reliable, and I fear we're moving in the direction of what Jay Lund, I think Jay's probably here, has often talked about. You fail into a solution. You have to have the disaster, the catastrophe, before you do something, and then you're going to do something half-assed.
Well, that's a great prelude, and thank you all. As Grant alluded to, WaterFix has gained the support of a diverse coalition of state water project contractors, including Kern County, Met, other Southern California state water project contractors, and 2 East Bay water agencies. And combined, the state water project contractors have pledged to pay about 84% of the state share of WaterFix. But support among CVP agricultural contractors has been problematic. Last month, as you all know, I think Westlands voted not to join WaterFix, concluding that the cost of the water that would be provided by the project, estimates range from $475 to $650 per acre foot, was too expensive. Westlands has suggested that it might reconsider if the project's costs were spread more broadly across all CVP contractors, which it estimates would reduce the cost to about $173 per acre foot. This is unlikely, however, as the Bureau of Reclamation has assured 2 large CVP contracting groups, the Exchange Contractors and the San Joaquin Valley Wildlife Refuges, that they will be exempt from paying any costs associated with CalFix. The Friant Water Authority has indicated that its members would not be willing to pay anything close to $173 per acre foot for project water. And the United States, as I just mentioned, confirmed that it will not make up for any of that funding deficit. Last week, Santa Clara Valley Water District, which is both a CVP and a state water project contractor, voted to support in principle a scaled-down version of the project, including a single tunnel, fewer intakes, and stronger protections for fish. This leaves a large percentage of the $17 million cost of WaterFix unfunded. And on Tuesday of this week, Secretary of Natural Resources John Laird said that going forward, the size of the project will have to fit the available funding. So again, I want to start with Grant and just ask, where do things stand today? Does the administration support a one-tunnel alternative?
You know, you remind me of Phil Donahue a little bit. You look like him. You set up this.
Choose to accept that as a compliment.
It's a compliment.
For now.
I think it's a compliment.
All right.
That's a pretty good assessment of exactly where we stand. And I hope you listen to this. It's an evolving. Lester went down a series of the history of how we got to where we are today. You heard from Jeff talking about moving his board through, making a decision to participate. What's not gone on and reported widely is that the Department of Water Resources and the team, led by Secretary of Resources John Laird and the governor, has been waiting to see who would be in and participating in WaterFix. And the analysis could not really be undertaken effectively until that was known. So if you have over 10 agencies that are saying that we're in and we're subscribed to 84% of the state share, it does leave one to do what Secretary Laird suggested, which is to now analyze who's in and what type of scale we're looking at, and put that in the context of the process that we have to go through to permit. So we're hard at work analyzing that type of information to see what we're going to be able to put forward. But one thing I do want to clear up, because it was in the Sacramento Bee this morning and reported in the Chronicle earlier, which was where the Trump administration is, because it is critical. I'm reading the statement that they put out, and this is verbatim. This was in contrast to a statement that was made yesterday by the Bureau about where the Trump administration was. And I'll admit, not just on water fix, but just about anything, you got to wonder where the Trump administration is coming from. And I personally do not want to put my destiny in that administration. I'll be honest. I don't think that that's a pathway for a clear and a consistent and a stable way forward. So clearly what we are working with is the coalition of the state water contractors. I see Jennifer Pierre here, who's been doing remarkable work leading them into this process. There's a lot that has gone into this. So what the Bureau did is reissued a statement, and I want to clarify that. This is, quote, "While the Department of the Interior shares the goals of the state of California to deliver water with more certainty, eliminating risks to the California water supply, and improving the environment, at this time, the department, under the current state proposal, does not expect to participate in the construction or funding of the California water fix. The department and reclamation will continue to work with the state and stakeholders as the project is further developed." That's a new statement. That, I hope, is broadly reported, because that's exactly where we're at. The Bureau invested in the planning of this project because they see strategic interests that could be met by working with the state. So I think it's safe to say that where we are in the process is that we have leadership that's been expressed by Zone 7 all the way down to Jeff at the Met. And the state water contractors are in. And at that point, we're ready to begin putting forward the project that ultimately is going to be designed, built, and implemented. Because if we don't do that, as I stated earlier, the heart of our water system is going to be in jeopardy, and we will be ending up managing in a crisis. And God forbid, I don't want to see a major earthquake or some other series of events that take out the Delta Islands and remove the opportunity to actually plan a more secure future.
Jeff, thank you. And Jeff, are we, in your opinion, headed toward a single tunnel state water project only project? And if so, would Met support that?
So we may be. We don't really know. It's a little premature. As everyone's pointed out, the state project is about 85% subscribed. One of the, anyone who works in water knows we're pretty fragmented. So one of the clever things we did is we all voted on something different. Met said, we're going to fund our share. I was like, okay, I thought that was pretty clear and simple. Other people said, I support a project. Others said, I support a project, and here's my wish list of what it would look like, despite the one we did in the environmental document. And others said, I'm going to vote for shares of a project, and somehow we'll subscribe to it. So we have a situation that's gelling in an odd sort of way. But more or less, we're sitting here at about 85% subscribed on the state project side that would support a single tunnel project. But it's like, let's fix half the problem and leave the other half there and still be in a litigation nightmare of who's responsible for what's going on with some element of reverse flow. Let's deal with, build a lot of habitat, but continue a destructive practice right next to it. Doesn't make sense for California. And so if my board would support it, we could strike out the southern part and just become Metropolitan Water District of California.
We may be making some news here today.
We'll build it and just work and figure out the rest of it later.
Yeah, well, I was just going to ask you that as a follow-up. My colleague Jeff Mount here claims that several years ago he wrote you a letter suggesting that Met build a through Delta conveyance, a tunnel. Met would own it, and if there was surplus capacity, Met could sell that surplus capacity and help pay for the project. Is that something that's plausible?
It was over a beer. It wasn't a letter. And and I think I was wearing a Dodger hat at the time, so he was. But is it plausible? It's certainly doable, and it would actually make a lot of sense. It would be much more efficient and smart and a way to do it where we have experience with big projects and things like that. Politically, I think that's optically. I think there's a few challenges with it that we'd have to work through.
All right, all right. Lester, I want to get you involved in this. I just want to preface it by noting a couple of things. In 2013, NRDC proposed a single 3,000 CFS tunnel combined with restoration of about 40,000 acres of delta habitat and increased investments in local water supply and demand reduction projects. This portfolio approach, as it was called, gained support from East Bay Mud, San Francisco PUC, Contra Costa Water District, San Diego County Water Authority, and 3 other water suppliers. Last December, several of us at PPIC published an op-ed in the Sacramento Bee in which we advocated a 3-part compromise on the Delta that would consist of a single 4,500 CFS tunnel, funding to shore up Delta levees, and allocation of environmental water and restoration funds to maximize overall ecological health, including investments in riparian and floodplain habitat in the North Delta and the Sacramento River watershed, with well-timed flows to support the life cycles of native species, something that Jeff's panel talked about earlier in that respect. So, Lester, feel free to comment on anything that was said before, but I mean, do you see some type of compromise that may look a little different from just a scaled-down version of water fix coming to the fore?
Well, I think that's possible, and perhaps the wise path. I mean, I don't know what the right dimensions are. I mean, I'll start there. I mean, I always felt a 3,000 CFS facility in the Delta just doesn't change enough from a fisheries standpoint. I mean, that was the whole point of an alternative diversion was to deal with fisheries issues. And
can you just detail that a little bit? I know Jay Lund and Peter Moyle, two of our longstanding colleagues, have suggested that a single tunnel 4,500 CFS also would not really improve fisheries habitat significantly. Can you just expand on that a little bit?
Well, the point of doing that, I mean, the Delta outflow, 85% comes off the Sacramento, and I forget the number, 5% off the San Joaquin, and the rest from some of the east side tributaries. So you're pulling water across the Delta, and unless you can substantively change the reverse flows and restore more natural migration patterns, you're always going to have conflict. Fisheries conflict, and it makes it more challenging to have a cohesive ecosystem vision for the Delta if you know that you're not able to do that. And then the other issue, and this is a term that it for a long time had great cachet, and now people make fun of it, but the big gulp, little sip type of thing, that when you have flows like we did earlier this year, you maximize getting those flows into storage. And the smaller you get, the less you're able to do that. So there's a lot of things that kind of impact that. But I think some alternative form, I think, needs to be discussed. But that begs, what's the governance structure for that? Is it DWR doing all of those things? No. And then the other thing, when you talk about, I think a path forward inevitably involves somebody being able to use capacity to sell water or sell the capacity and make a revenue stream off of that. As soon as you do that, then I think you've got to ask yourself the question, do we want private sector investment? I mean, there's money in the stock market that is dying for a place to go. And would they invest in a project for a piece of the action? That's probably anathema to a lot of the water community. But when you've been working on a project for 50 years and you can't get anywhere, maybe you ought to think of a different path somehow.
You know, one thing I'd like to just add to what Lester said that gets lost in this discussion. When we started down this path a decade ago on the planning, you remember the pumps are 15,000 CFS. Use a nice Southern California analogy. That's like a 5-lane freeway. And our initial thinking was we should build a 5-lane conveyance to connect with that 5-lane freeway so you don't have a bottleneck. So our sweet spot was 15,000 CFS. The compromise that went through and tried to come up with something that would be a little more acceptable and palatable and still function and have that minimum functional capability became 9,000 CFS. And then it became, well, let's compromise the compromise and make sure it doesn't really work and function. And that's kind of where we're at now. So, you know, I do run an engineering agency, and there is part of us that just looks at it and goes, you know, what we've proposed here is a physical solution that works. What we seem to be trying to get to politically is a physical solution that will fail, but let's spend a lot of money and chase it anyway. That's unfortunate.
I want to pivot in just a moment and talk about, make sure we have some time to talk about the Colorado River, but I want to ask Grant one last question, and again, Jeff and Lester, feel free to, you know, chime in if you'd like on this as well. So what Lester was describing is a project or set of projects that's quite different, I think, from WaterFix. And there's been concern that if this project is just scaled down, if WaterFix is just scaled down to a single tunnel, the existing environmental documentation, the CEQA analysis, would not be adequate to support it. Would these kind of broader proposals drag things out sufficiently that the administration would be reluctant to support them? I guess another way to put it is there a sense of, you've all described a sense of urgency, but is there a real sense of urgency, in part because there's only 14 months left in the Brown administration?
Great question, Phil.
I'm going to ask for a pay raise on this because I don't make anywhere near what Phil makes.
I really would prefer not to speculate on that one because you've heard, it's not safe for me to do it right now, honestly. We're in process, and to take a hypothetical that's that far-ranging that I'm going to take a thread off of Lester's view, I really subscribe to what Lester and Jeff have to say. They are brilliant tacticians that have been in the trenches for quite some time, and you can hear this 40-year pent-up desire to see us address the most pressing challenge in California water right now. And I guess I would say, it does go without saying that this governor, in his second term around, has been paying attention. And this is a critically important aspect of his work. He's been engaged, and he's been diligently supporting our work and directing us to take constructive and make the progress that we can make. So I will acknowledge that the time is of the essence in that regard. And I'll acknowledge that there's an environmental process that we must go through, which is fairly rigorous and going to be complicated. And that has to be factored into the consideration of what it is we do with the state contractors and a Trump administration that's sort of on again, off again is how I would call it. So I believe you have some of the smartest people in the state of California working on this. I think you've got people in leadership positions that care very deeply about a successful outcome, that understand the historic significance of the work that's gone before us and those that have gone before us that have gotten us here. So we are literally standing on the shoulders of years of work. And while Jeff made that comment, I sort of want to distance myself somewhat because I do run DWR, and I agree that Jeff's own assessment of around a beer with a Dodger hat on is not going to carry the day with the entire state of California. And so I think I can confidently say that ain't going to happen.
Much as Jeff would like
Much
to
as
think
Jeff
he
would
has
like to
that
think
kind
would
of
happen.
authority. Yeah.
But I came here for a reason. I want to assure you that I spent much of my career working with the best scientists, colleagues that care deeply about ecosystems, that would like to see a delta that's restored, that functions and is healthy, that actually is supporting the type of endangered species that we prefer to take off the list in the right way, which is by restoring habitat. We're already 8,000 acres in toward what was described before. And I can see clearly, if you put enough time on that horizon, that we're looking closer to the 30,000 acre feet that was originally envisioned in Eco Restore. I have a whole team at DWR with the best consultants working diligently to move out on that vision. And I purposely think it's disingenuous to just separate these out. I think we're coming to a point where delinking WaterFix from Eco Restore misses the full complement of what we're actually doing. I am passionate about the Delta and the Bay. The Bay and the Delta need certain amounts of water to function properly. The species that depend on that ecosystem have habitat needs in order to become secure. And I want to make sure we focus on that a bit, because that's the inspiration. That's actually where you live up to what the challenge ultimately is, which is a restored delta and bay, and linking the river systems that support that ecosystem. And the ag sector, as Jeff and Lester mentioned, is absolutely critical. We are becoming the 6th largest economy in the entire world. And to deny the fact that ag is going to be part of the equation is also missing a piece. So I think along the way, it's about time we begin putting the entire composite together and look what is a comprehensive approach to a more secure water future. And you have a governor who's paying attention the second time around with the benefit of the first time around, and I see him employing the lessons learned right now. He's designated some of the most capable people I've ever worked with, and I'm actually very optimistic.
Lester, this is not how I planned it, but it's exactly as I anticipated it would turn out. We have 7 minutes left to talk about the Colorado River. Do you want to add anything
Well, I do want to add a very quick comment, knowing that we can't discuss it, but it was implicit in a number of our comments, and that's the issue of governance. So one of the biggest obstacles we've seen, whether it was CalFed or BDCP or what have you, is trust. I know what you're saying, I don't trust you. And I don't trust DWR to carry it out, or the state board. And so you run into that all the time, and I think that's been one of our failures, not just currently, but historically, to really try to address a new governance structure to deal with these complex ecosystems and complex water matters. And I think that's going to be essential, not just on this, but in other areas of what's the governance structure. And as I said a moment ago, is there a way to bring in private sector capital that can help on some of these funding issues and financing issues?
Well, in the time we have left, which is 6 minutes or so, I do want to talk a little bit about the Colorado River. It is California's other major source of surface water. California shares this resource with 6 other states, 20 Indian tribes, and Mexico. The waters of the Colorado have been overallocated, and the basin has been in long-term drought. California is the largest single user of this water, which supplies almost 20 million residents and businesses in Southern California, as well as about 600,000 acres of irrigated farmland, mostly in Imperial and Riverside counties. There have been 3 very important recent developments. I was going to outline them, but in the interest of time and really expertise, I'm going to ask our panelists to describe them briefly. And these are the Minute 323 agreement with Mexico, the Lower Colorado Basin Drought Contingency Plan negotiations, and then the Salton Sea Restoration Program Phase 1. So this isn't particularly well organized, but who would like to start in describing what these are briefly and why are they so important? Jeff, go ahead.
Sure. Colorado River is sort of my happy place to go to after working on the Delta, and that's because I own and operate my own aqueduct. I don't have to work with other partners, and oddly enough, we get along better with 6 other states, another country, and 10 Indian tribes than we do in an intra-California project. Starting in 2003, we have made so much collaborative progress on the Colorado River, and most of it's driven by necessity. We've been in a 15-year drought. It's being driven downward. Even the last decade, precipitation's actually been average, but we're getting about 10 to 15% less runoff, and that's climate change, earlier spring, earlier plant blooming. It's just we are losing about 10 to 15% of our supply there, and it's caused us to scramble. And we put together a whole series of agreements with the basin states. Starting in 2003 and 2005, we put together a multi-species plan that's really working well on the river for all its species. 2007, the interim guidelines on how to share shortages for the first time. We're working on an update, a drought contingency plan right now. Really collaborative processes with Mexico, Minute 323. It has environmental pulse flow. We did in 319, Minute 319, 323 has new environmental programs, working collaboratively with the nation of Mexico, where we're going to invest in water-saving programs, and then Metropolitan will get some of that water back along with Southern Nevada. So a lot of great collaborative process, driven by necessity, but also driven by a group of people that have decided, after the debacle of Arizona versus California and 2 decades before the U.S. Supreme Court, and every side getting decimated, saying, enough with this, let's figure this out and solve it ourselves. A nice model. I wonder if we could do it elsewhere.
Lester, you've been working on these issues for a long time as well. Do you want to add to that? And just in light of Jeff's comment about this being his happy place in relative terms, are there lessons that we can learn for other aspects of California water policy, I suppose especially the Delta? Are there lessons we can learn from the Colorado River?
Boy, that's a great question. I'm not sure how much of that is transferable. I mean, when I flash back to when I used to attend the 7 states meetings, it was often like attending a paint drying session of some sort. It was god-awful painful. But necessity took over. And because of those earlier meetings, people had relationships, and it became very professional. And so you had people at the table that, if time permitted, they'd go on and on about how they'd been mistreated for 100 years on the Colorado River. But when the fire was at the door, then the relationships existed. Everybody had consultants or specialists, and it got extremely professional. And it's that what has been missing in the Delta, just kind of this professional discussion of a serious and complex issue. So I don't know how you replicate that in our situation. I mean, one of the things, the previous panel, some of the stuff that Lewis brought up about how they slowly kind of broke down the groups. You used to just, you had your, your den, as it were, your group that you identified with, and you never crossed that line. In the Delta, not only have we fortified them, but they've been spawning in their group. And there are now new generations of folks. In the Colorado River, probably at any one meeting, you wouldn't say this, but it's just very professional. And people laid out positions. There's a lot to be done. The Salton Sea is critical path. If you don't fix the Salton Sea, there's a lot that doesn't work in the lower basin. And there's still some heavy lifting to be done there, including, no surprise, funding is still a big issue. But I'm not sure about other lessons. Jeff probably has a better sense about what lessons could be brought in.
Jeff's not going to take it.
Yeah, Grant, I was going to give Grant the last word anyway. So,
thank you. I really appreciate that, Phil. I want to acknowledge that there is a water bond scheduled for the June ballot, which has the all-important funding portions of it for the Salton Sea and many other things. So please ensure that you talk to your friends, colleagues, and family about the importance of that bond on the June ballot in 2018, which took a lot of work, again, amongst other things. I want to say I was up in the upper Colorado River Basin within the first 2 weeks because of its importance to California. And I was struck by the same thing that's been mentioned there, the tremendous collaboration amongst the states and the boards that engage because of necessity. There's this overwhelming sense that they need to divide up the Colorado, and the very livelihood depends on it. And I was on Flaming Gorges Dam and had the opportunity to ask Janine Jones, who's one of the forces of nature inside DWR, who I learned to depend on years ago because I was working with her at Sonoma County Water Agency. And I asked Janine in front of all the folks there, this is a Bureau facility, a little dangerous, but we need to activate the Bureau. There's just no question that as difficult as we've heard over the last few days where the Trump administration is, the Bureau of Reclamation has so much to say about the health and well-being of water in California that we simply must find a way forward. I intend to build the strongest possible relationships I can with the Bureau, and I suggest the state must do this. Jeff has them. So we're up at Flaming Gorges Dam, and I asked Janine, what is our current predictive capability 7 days out for a dam operator? And she said, Director Davis, it's 70% accurate. And that's pretty good. You'd actually make an adjustment and plan your facilities off of 70% accuracy. And I said, Janine, what's our accuracy for precipitation 14 days out? And she said, that would be 7%, Mr. Davis. And I'm like, oh, that's like flipping a coin, folks. You would not operate your dam any differently based off of a prediction 14 days out. And that is our calling. We must narrow the gap between the 7-day 70% forecast and the 7% 14-day forecast. And that is something we are working diligently with the Bureau, with the Army Corps, with NOAA Weather, and the National Marine Fisheries Service, and others that have the federal state ability to collaborate on this. I'm looking at Lake Mendocino, one of the former facilities that I manage, because we lost half of our water supply by one decision by the Corps to follow the rule curve that said you must release your water. 20,000 acre feet, half of the water supply that I managed for an entire year, gone in a matter of days. We didn't get another drop of water for 15 months. Imagine, I was managing a mud puddle during the drought. I'm looking at Prado Dam, another Corps facility down in Orange County, where there's tremendous opportunity to take advantage of 21st century measures and to employ those onto our dams and our facilities. That's a calling that we literally must rise to. And I'm also optimistic that we can, with enough funding and prioritization, improve upon our ability to manage our reservoirs using up-to-date forecasting, and will improve our security.
Great. Well, thank you all. I'm sure there will be questions. The microphones will be coming around. Let me remind you that the Jeopardy rules apply. You must form your thoughts or state your thoughts in the form of a question, or it will not be considered. So, who would like to begin? This isn't possible. Oh, here's a question.
Okay, we're done.
Somewhere over here, yes. We were so thorough that we left no room for debate. Yes, right here, please.
Hi, I was one of the directors that had the awesome privilege to cast a vote for California Water Fix. The one thing we haven't talked about today is about all the litigation that's out there. Like many people in Southern California, I have family up in the Delta. I'm not looking forward to Thanksgiving this year, probably not next year. I'm that person from Southern California. Can you make any comments about how with those counties we are going to find resolution? Thank you.
So, as a former lawyer, there's nothing wrong with a little litigation. It's full employment for everybody. But thanks, Susan. We got most big projects in California have litigation. It's just a fundamental aspect of what we do, and we're going to have to work through it. And what you try and do is have that go on a parallel track. We finished lining the entire All-American Canal 3 years before the litigation stopped, completed, which was, of course, trying to block the lining. So we tend to do these things, and we're just going to have to work through it and work with them on a parallel track. But my usual experience has been once you start the project, things calm down, things settle down. There's all this hoopla over it, but it's this Gordian knot. Once you cut it, a lot of folks go, it's not so bad. And they work through it, and meanwhile, you're improving the roads, you're doing the infrastructure, you're doing all those things you can in the community. You're working with the community to minimize impacts and get through the problems and to help them get through it. It's that decision, the initial decision that everyone fights tooth and nail. But once you get past it, then usually people sit down and get to work and start moving things.
Other questions?
Thank you. I apologize myself. I'm one of the cranks from the Delta. My name's Bill Wells. I'm the executive director of the California Delta Chambers and Visitors Bureau. Number one, I just have a comment and a question, but the comment is, you talk about 9,000 cubic feet per second capacity tunnels. Mark Cowan at a news conference said they could push 15,000 cubic feet per second through a 10-foot diameter tunnel. So if you do the math, one of those tunnels has a capacity of over 200,000 cubic feet per second. So the two of them combined potentially could drain the Sacramento River. The intakes are 9,000 cubic feet, but why do we need the tunnel so big? But that's not my question. In human history, there's never been a diversion like this that has not destroyed the parent waterway. And a few examples are San Joaquin River, Mono Lake, Tulare Lake, Buena Vista Lake, Owens Dry Lake, and the Colorado River here in California. So can the panelists offer a few, maybe 3 or 4 examples of where a diversion like this has worked?
I'm just the moderator. So.
It was sort of a question. Barely.
No, I think there was a question there. It's not a question that I can give you examples. I'm absolutely very sympathetic with the point of view that you raised. The Delta is such a special place, and we must do everything that we can to make this work. And I want to assure you that the answer lies in the operations of whatever is constructed. And while I have nothing but profound respect for my predecessor, Mark Cowan, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. And so I don't think, unfortunately, I don't think you have a microphone, and so I barely heard what you had to say, so I'm going to try and finish my thought.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Grant. It was a suggestion to move the intakes down closer to Sherman Island, just for those watching online.
Yep.
And to dam Carquinez Strait.
And to dam Carquinez Strait. Thank you, Tim.
You know, I guess if you go back to the idea of a 40-year history to get here, I'm almost wondering if we haven't thought about or proposed every single alternative there is along the way. I think I've heard them all, but there may be a new one out there I haven't thought of. The fact of the matter is, we have made such significant progress to get to this point. When the state and federal agencies that are responsible for fisheries have passed the environmental steps to move forward, that's a threshold that I think many were probably wondering if we'd ever get to, and we did. We're now moving into an environmental process in front of the State Water Resources Control Board, and I would say that's the target I'm looking at along the way. And so all I'll say is the track record is not good for California water when it comes to destroying and harming ecosystems that we depend upon. I'll acknowledge that. I'm quite sympathetic with that, and I don't intend to do that, but I don't have the leg to stand on right now to prove it to you. And that is what Lester referred to earlier, which is the lack of trust. That's the side that has not been established well enough to provide the assurances and the security that whatever it is that is ultimately designed and gets built will be operated correctly. And I share your concern. That's how I'll answer that.
Yeah, no, Grant mentioned lack of trust, and I'm glad that someone asked a question like this, because there is this lack of trust. To some extent, it's interregional, but not necessarily so in all cases. So let me just ask Jeff and Lester, what are ways of addressing that?
No, it is hard. There's no doubt about it. But I think you just have to keep going and keep moving forward. We did that on the Colorado River. We just touched on it briefly, but we realized we had both a physical problem. We weren't getting the water supply. We had a shrinking water supply. We were getting cut back from the Secretary of Interior, and we also had environmental species issues. So after years of hammering it out and watching paint dry, we did get together and get a multi-species plan, a 50-year plan. We did get together and come up with interstate arrangements. We did get together and fund them all, with each state paying their share. So we did start implementing solutions, and it just took a long time to get there, and we didn't trust each other. Arizona and California sued each other for 40 years before we started working together. But eventually you have to start working together because we have 40 million people crammed into the state. Whether you like it or not, we got to find a way to make the resources work and share them. So at some point, you have to start doing it. We've done it other places. We ought to be able to do it here.
Lester, do you want to add to that?
Well, two thoughts on that. And there's a lot of cynicism about regulations, I guess. People don't trust, the state board, we can't trust them. But that's a level of security on making sure you operate the system correctly. And so if the project, when it moves forward, is going to have all kinds of permits, and this is how you have to operate in order to comply with these permits. And there seems to be this thought that one day somebody could just waive all of them. Jeff already mentioned that the current pumping capacity of the State Water Project is 15,000 CFS, and it's been that way for a very long time. So Dave Kennedy must have done that. So was that in the 60s? I don't remember.
The two projects combined.
Ah, yes. I always had them run together in my mind. That was always my goal,
And it's a good goal. It's a good goal. It ought to happen.
And I passed that on to Grant.
This is why I provided the extended biography for you, Lester.
But my point is, why don't they run them at 15,000 CFS all the time and drain the Delta because nobody cares about the Delta or the Sacramento or the Bay? And first, they actually do care about that ecosystem, and second, because there is a solid regulatory structure to keep from doing that. The other governance issue is a little more challenging, and that's kind of the ongoing deliberation where you have choices you can make about flows now, flows later, should we pump now, should we store, does some of that environmental water? That's one I don't think has probably been adequately addressed in terms of some sort of ongoing governance structure to help make operational decisions within some parameters. And I think that would go a long way. There are some in these camps or dens that I referred to earlier. It doesn't matter what you do. If you hand the keys to them, if you let them make all the choices, that will ever agree with a project like this. But first, State Board's going to take a whole series of actions. ESA is with us. We have all of these different things that will provide some stability to the way that you operate these facilities.
Any last one? We have time for a last question? No? One right here. Yes.
Yeah, I'm going to stretch this a little bit, okay? And I'm going to make a statement. If Lester, you would comment first on this. There are some viewpoints that recognize the California climate has historically, and I'm talking about geologically, it's had some really low flow rates. And we're talking about 100-year duration droughts, some pretty serious stuff right in California. And mankind, they weren't around. Yet the habitats did adapt somehow, and life went on, and of course there were ebbs and flows and things changed. Today we're striving to constrain flows to what we've lived and seen for the last 100 years, and it happens to be a time period when it's been rather wet for California. Of course, we know that we can see now that that's actually changing. It's going to go back to its other mode. So maybe we're not being realistic with our goals. That's where I conclude that's the conclusion. Now you guys, the three of you guys, you're really intuitive. And I've been told that the water fairy's in the room. I mean, Jeff attests to that. So maybe now would be a good time. What goal or nuance on the existing goals would be more realistic to marry together the habitat and the human needs for water?
And those are actually, that's quite a good question. We are over our time, so if any of you have a quick response. Grant wanted to say one thing also before we conclude. So Lester, do you want to take this?
Well, very quick. You bring up an important point, and when it comes to water, I'm not so thinking so much about the specific quantity, but what we need to restore to the system is some reliability and predictability, even if it's at lower levels. And what that means is kind of a portfolio approach of doing as much as you can in your area to provide resilience, and it means restoring some ecosystem resilience so we can tolerate those big changes. Because we don't know how much more of a change we're going to see in the future, but we've got to not focus on I demand 1 million acre feet. It's I demand some reliability and predictability in the system.
Thank you. And Grant wanted to say one thing about the topic. I promised him I wouldn't ask him.
Yeah, well, it's because I'm going to take your lead there. So Brian, thank you for your moderation and letting me take over for a little bit of it. And it's a privilege to be on the stage with these two. There's been another major initiative that I've been needing to work through with DWR staff that you've read about and been watching, hopefully, and that is Oroville. I've been known to say up and down the state, Oroville, 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 because it's really been a signature priority of mine. November 1 has always been the target date that Governor Brown and my predecessor, Bill Croyle, put out there to get that facility back and weatherized for the coming winter. And when I first went there during the first week on the job, I had not seen the spillway. And I remember distinctly turning the corner and looking up at the tallest dam in the United States and thinking, oh my gosh, what have I signed up for? This is our Grand Canyon, folks. And they call it Croyle Canyon, actually. And I could not be more proud than to let you know that we are just about completed to a point where the main spillway has been repaired and will be ready for the winter. Now, that's by no means something that we're going to be celebrating in the sense because there's more work to be done. That's the main spillway, the one that actually encountered the significant damage that it did. But the emergency spillway will then carry on through the remainder of the year and into January 2018. And we have a full next year until we get the dam completely back into the 21st century dam safety. But it's a topic that if I have a forum like this, I can't help end with. We've talked about water fix. We've touched briefly on Colorado. But Oroville is the signature dam that we rely on, and it suffered greatly because largely of those extreme weather events that I mentioned. We had projections of moderate atmospheric rivers that were going to come over in February. Instead, we ended up with Category 5 two major atmospheric rivers that caused the spillway to do what it did. And we must understand that phenomenon better. That's our extreme weather that we are encountering. So 5 years of a drought followed by record rainfall. That extreme is what water managers throughout the entire state and the West are dealing with. So I want to commend the men and women of DWR and Kiewit and others that have worked since February 7th around the clock to get that facility back into working order. We will be managing it very conservatively. We're below the 700-foot elevation level so that we are better prepared if, in fact, we encounter that type of extreme this year. Because public safety, when it comes to dams, has to be our priority. And as you probably know, we currently manage, just in the state right now, 1,249 dams. Not all of them are the size of Oroville, but the ones that are categorized as high priority and extremely high priority, those that are going to cause loss of life, have got to be evaluated in more detail. And the lessons learned from the forensic team are such that we must share with the broader dam safety community. And I want you to know that that's our intent, is to get the dam back operating. We've done it. I'm profoundly grateful of the staff and the contractors and all that have worked so hard. And come November 1, we will be back to a point where we can safely say that we can manage that facility. And we are in agreement with FERC, Division of Dam Safety, DWR, and the Army Corps of Engineers. And I wanted you all to know that because that's of vital importance for water managers in California. So thank you. Great.
Well, on that very positive note, please join me in thanking the panel for what I think was a truly wonderful discussion. And thank you all for joining us. Ellen, did you want to say a couple of last?